On December 14, 2023, Russian President Vladimir Putin holds a direct line with citizens and a large press conference with journalists. The combined event, called Results of the Year, held in Gostiny Dvor. Both Russian and foreign media were invited to the event at Gostiny Dvor in Moscow. The event lasted 4 hours 3 minutes. During this time, representatives of federal and regional Russian media, as well as foreign journalists accredited in Russia, are personally present in the hall. The discussion is moderated by the press secretary of the head of state, Dmitry Peskov, as well as Channel 1 presenter Ekaterina Berezovskaya and journalist of the Russia 1 TV channel Pavel Zarubin. Questions from citizens were accepted through the Moskva Patinu website, RU in the form of text or video, as well as through the social networks VKontakte and Odnoklassniki. During this occasion, Putin answered to many questions from media representatives and Russian citizens. In particular, Putin paid a lot of attention to the topic of a special military operation, support for fighters and their families, and also spoke in detail about the main socio-economic indicators of the Russian Federation. The head of state answered 80 questions from both media representatives and citizens. Russians sent more than 2 million questions to the direct line. The president also commented on a number of international topics: the future of relations with the European Union, the role of the UN in the modern world, the general plans of the Russian Federation and Turkey. In addition, Putin was asked questions about the severity of liability for economic crimes, about the sharp rise in the price of eggs and the rise in housing and communal services tariffs, and whether Russian athletes should go to the Olympics taking into account the sanctions. But for the sake of this video, we will take a look at the most important topics that has a lot to do with Russia's special military operations in Ukraine and Russia's economic war with the US and the West. This video will be divided into 2 parts. The first part will be Putin's discussions on the special military operations in Ukraine, and the second part will talk on Putin's elaboration on the Russian economy and the economic war between Russia and the West. The head of state noted that the country's economy has already recovered from last year's decline, emphasized the immutability of the goals of the operation in Ukraine, and spoke about measures to support new regions. Vladimir Putin thanked the people of the country who are responding and heartfelt to the needs of those at the front. According to him, more than 10 billion rubles in donations were collected. As for the fact that people are responding, the Popular Front is actively working. They created the Everything for Victory movement. They gathered it together. Of course, the state can do without support, but it is impossible to stop. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank our citizens, who are sincere about the needs of the front, the needs of our children. Over 10 billion rubles in donations. Of course, when our economy is booming, we have these funds, but what people send from themselves is weaving nets, knitting mittens and socks. Children wrote 3 million letters, he said. Russian authorities welcome private assistance to special operation fighters on the front line, but 99.9% of everything is done by the state. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced this on a direct line and at a press conference. The state is doing this. 99.9% of the efforts in the period are the state. But people do it, organize the collection of aid from the heart, and we welcome this and will not limit it. I just want to thank them for this, Putin said in response to a question from a resident of the Moscow region. Why in most cases the population of the Russian Federation, and not the state, is involved in helping the soldiers of the Northern Military District. Many people in Europe, the United States and other regions of the world support what Russia is doing, Putin said. Russia is not afraid to fight for its own interests without encroaching on others. Russia's defense of traditional values is supported by a huge number of supporters in the world. Their number is increasing, the head of the Russian Federation noted. Vladimir Putin, during a direct line and press conference, thanked the soldiers of the Volunteer Assault Brigade of the Russian Ministry of Defense, veterans, for their work on the battlefield as part of a special military operation. I want to thank you for what you are doing. This sounds somewhat routine, but nevertheless, believe me, from the bottom of my heart, and the Chief of the General Staff, and other commanders know what they told me. Here on such a situation is being created in such a sector, now there are veterans there. The situation will definitely be taken under control, and these simple words are an assessment of what you are doing, can do and, I'm sure, will do on the battlefield, Putin said. Answering a question from Sergei Sobolev, a member of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Veterans Assault Brigade. The situation with awarding PMC fighters the status of combat veterans is a gap allowed by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced this. There is a problem. And I think that these are gaps that should not have been allowed by the Ministry of Defense, the head of state said, answering a question from one of the PMC fighters who was denied a combat veteran's certificate by the Military Registration and Enlistment Office and the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation. Putin also said that the children of some people from his inner circle fought in PMCs. The rights of PMC fighters must be restored, they must enjoy support and benefits, like all participants in hostilities. The fund for supporting special operations fighters is working well. This was also stated by Russian President Vladimir Putin. As for the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation, it works well, the people there are very good. I met with the director, Anna Evgenievna. And I was in one of the branches in the region. The people are gorgeous. Chic, you know, charged with very positive work. But their competencies are limited. The statutory documents are formulated in such a way that they do not seem to directly participate. The President of the Russian Federation proposed expanding the control of the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation over the funds allocated, including for the rehabilitation of fighters. The situation with drones in the Russian troops is improving, its own production is growing, and some are being purchased privately abroad. Russian President Vladimir Putin noted. Putin also said that 617,000 people are in the combat zone of the special military operation. I say again, the length of the line of contact is over 2,000 kilometers. There are 617,000 people, in the combat zone, he said. There is no need for a new wave of mobilization in Russia. Currently, 486,000 people have voluntarily entered into contracts for military service to defend the country, including in the zone of a special military operation. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated this at a direct line and press conference, answering the question of whether there will be a second wave of mobilization. At the beginning of the mobilization there was a lot of irony about such a call, but the mobilized fought well. 14 mobilized received the title of Hero of Russia. Currently, 244,000 mobilized people are in the Special Operations Zone, 41,000 people have been dismissed due to health or upon reaching the age limit. This year, 486,000 people have already been recruited into the Russian army under contract. Every day, 1.5 thousand Russian men enlist in the RF armed forces, and the flow of those wishing to defend their homeland with arms in their hands does not stop. The Russian military is improving its position along almost the entire line of combat contact. President Vladimir Putin said, almost along the entire line of contact, our armed forces, let's say modestly, are improving their position. Almost everyone is in an active stage of action, and the position of our troops is improving throughout. The Ukrainian armed forces did not succeed anywhere with the counter-offensive. The head of the Russian Federation called the Ukrainian armed forces' attempt to break through to the left bank of the Dnieper the last attempt at a counter-offensive. Putin expressed bewilderment why the Ukrainian armed forces are pushing people to be exterminated on the bridgehead in Krinky on the left bank of the Dnieper. The Ukrainian armed forces in Krinky are caught in a firebag and are throwing personnel there only for political purposes. In Krinky on the left bank of the Dnieper there were about 80 military personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine, now there are fewer. The Russian Federation has destroyed 747 tanks and 2.3 thousand armored vehicles of the Ukrainian armed forces since the beginning of the Ukrainian counter-offensive, Putin said. Just starting with the so-called counter-offensive, we destroyed 747 tanks. This is data as of yesterday evening, almost 2.3 thousand armored vehicles. This is demilitarization. The head of state also recalled that during the negotiations in Istanbul certain parameters for demilitarization were agreed upon, but later these agreements were thrown into the oven. The objectives of the special operation do not change. The task of denazification of Ukraine remains relevant, Putin said. There will be peace when we achieve our goals. They do not change. I will remind you of what we talked about: the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, its neutral status. Today, Ukraine no longer produces almost any weapons, everything is brought to them for free, but this freebie is ending, the head of the Russian Federation noted. Vladimir Putin has no doubt that Russia will win the special military operation. I am confident that victory will be ours, the head of state said during a direct line in a large press conference. Putin called the conflict with Ukraine similar to a civil war between brothers. What led to the Ukrainian conflict was the West's unbridled desire to creep up to Russian borders and take Ukraine into NATO. Russia was forced to launch a special military operation. Odessa is a Russian city, and everyone knows this well, Putin said, answering a question from our agency. The southeast of Ukraine has always been pro-Russian because these are historical Russian territories. After the collapse of the USSR, Russia came to terms with the departure of its ancestral territories, but attached importance to the pro-Russian sentiments of southeastern Ukraine. Putin called the participation of special operation fighters in patriotic education in demand. The president gave the example and agreed with the words of Bismarck that wars are won not by generals, but by teachers and priests. Vladimir Putin also called on the management of Russian television channels to remove female correspondents from the front line of the special operation. By the way, when I watch you, sometimes my heart clench. Especially the girls. They run right on the first line. The management of the channels should be told to get the women out of there. It's kind of scary to look at it. That's all for the part 1 of this video. Please don't forget to watch the part 2 of the video.